today is Ring the Bell for Women Empowerment and Innovation and Gender Equality. Today we have moderator Anenken Tab, markets reporter for MarketWatch, and esteemed panelists, Alicia Petros, Vice President, Diversity and Inclusion and Engagement for Hershey's Company, Wanda Hope, the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Johnson & Johnson, Sandra Taylor, Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion, Royal Bank of Canada Capital Markets, and Susan Keating, Chief Executive Officer, Women Corporate Director Foundation. And I know you want to know a lot about this panel, but why not? They will tell you themselves what are they doing and what are their passion, and mostly what their corporate efforts for gender equality and women empowerment.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, but mostly ladies. Let's jump right in now that you're already introduced. And I have a question for Alicia, Wanda, and Sandy right away. Can you talk a little bit about what innovation for gender equality looks like in your sectors, in your industries, and in your companies specifically?
Sure.
Yes.
I'll be happy to start. Sandy Taylor, RBC Capital Markets. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. This is an esteemed group of women to serve on this panel with, so I'm excited to be here. We in the financial services sector have done a few things, and I'll speak to something specifically that we've done at my firm, RBC Capital Markets, as an example of what we've done in terms of gender equality and innovation. One such thing is we launched an ETF, which is a fund similar to a stock, an exchange-traded fund. And that fund allows for investors to recognize companies that have excelled in the area of demonstrating gender equality. Some of the criteria that they consider is senior executive leadership composition as it pertains to women. RBC happens to have 50%. They also look at executive leader composition. That for women for RBC is 47%. And they also look at board composition. And our chair of the board is a woman, and the composition of our board is 42%. The other thing that I'd like to highlight that we've done in that category is to launch a group, a sustainable finance group. And that group is dedicated to ensuring that advice is provided to investors, to ensure that they have information as it pertains to portfolios for investing in environmental, social, and governance opportunities. And I'm mentioning those also in part because they were spearheaded and is now headed by a woman. Now that shouldn't be a surprise, but what I will add is that that woman returned to work. She left work for several years and came back. So I say all that to say that when given the opportunity and given the platform and the runway and the support and the sponsorship, women can absolutely contribute to the business strategy and more so the performance of the business.
Great. Wanda, do you want to add on?
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Wanda Hope, and I'm thrilled to be here with you all today and so excited to sit on this panel with these wonderful women and successful women. I'm with Johnson & Johnson. I've been with Johnson & Johnson for a really long time. I was born at Johnson & Johnson. But I've spent the bulk of my career actually on the commercial side of the business, leading sales and marketing and general management type positions. About 4 years ago, I moved into be our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. And as I stepped into that role, one of the things that we've decided to do to really kind of innovate both around gender equality and around diversity and inclusion overall is to really think about diversity and inclusion as a critical business priority, not thinking about it as activities or training or only around talent management. And so, we've really integrated how we think and how we act on diversity and inclusion into our critical business strategies, because we know that the more we have a workforce that resembles the diverse and multicultural markets that we serve, and the more that we create an environment that is inclusive and allows them to be energized and engaged and to have a voice and to fully participate, the more we drive innovation, for the diverse markets that we serve around the world. And, a couple of examples of how we're doing that is, we recognize, as I'm sure many people do, how unconscious bias may seep into our thinking a little bit. And we know it's embedded into our systems and processes. So we have lots of strategies around how do we mitigate this unconscious bias that's woven throughout everything we do at Johnson & Johnson. It's not just a training course. So, for us, it's how do we do performance management differently, and how do we bust and mitigate unconscious bias there? How do we do compensation planning differently? When we're looking at our businesses and we're thinking about the consumers that we serve or the patients that we serve, how do we integrate diversity and inclusion into our thinking so that we can better meet the needs of those consumers and patients in the external markets that we serve? So innovation for us is around innovating how we think about diversity and inclusion, how we treat it as a business priority and integrate it into everything we do, because we know when we do that, that actually drives innovation for the patients, consumers, and markets that we serve around the world, and that leads to bottom line business growth.
Yeah, Sandy?
So I'm Alicia Petros, Vice President, Diversity, Inclusion, and Engagement for the Hershey Company. I joined the sweetest company on earth 5 years ago. Our company's 125-year-old mission is bringing goodness to the world through our iconic brands, our remarkable people, and our compelling social sustainability efforts. Our company was born from a relentless entrepreneur. So for us, like your company, innovation is not just essential, it is our foundation. We also believe in shared goodness, and our founder created the Milton Hershey School. Today, that world-class boarding institution serves 2,300 underserved boys and girls every year. And the success of the Hershey Company funds that continued premier educational institution. So we're innovating for gender equality in several ways. We innovate for our consumers, our key customers, our key partners, and our employees. And for us and the consumer packaged goods industry, women drive 70 to 80% of consumer purchases. So for us, gender equality is essential. It drives creativity, productivity, and innovation. One of our best practices around continuing gender equity and empowerment is developing strategies that can result in moving women into senior leadership roles. The gender diversity of our C-suite is intentional. Our CEO and each member of our executive suite have committed to continue to increase the diversity of the functions that they lead. Notably, Hershey's made some progress, with results that we have 5 women on our board of directors, or 45% representation, 42% female representation on our executive committee, including our chief financial officer and our chief growth officer. Additionally, women run many of the top roles, top commercial roles in the organization, and females represent half of our total non-management workforce. For us, we recognize diversity, including gender diversity and inclusion, as a strategic advantage, and that propels our mission. But we also know that innovation is born from inclusion, and in fact, you need inclusion in order for innovation to be relevant. And so I think what's important for all of us is that when gender equality and inclusion are prioritized, innovation can thrive.
I have a follow-up question for all 3 of you. Regarding hiring and retaining a diverse talent pool, what are the specific challenges that come up with that, and what are some strategies to manage them?
So for us at Hershey, moving women into senior leadership roles is an important and evolving and enduring kind of strategy. And so we really focus on providing equal opportunity in our sector by identifying talent and working with them diligently to plan careers. So a couple of keys there are a very sincere and strong commitment to seeking out, sourcing, hiring, and developing the most qualified talent. Leveraging diverse slates, whether we're hiring externally or we're promoting from within. Really focusing on developmental experiences and career maps that create opportunities which qualify women for leadership positions. And ultimately taking a look at career plans so that we're taking advantage of opportunities to accelerate and move individuals into leadership roles. We found that to be a differentiator. Lastly, our executive team holds robust and ongoing dialogue around talent planning and development, and for us, that ensures that our leaders receive the appropriate feedback and support.
Sandy?
So in addition to requiring diverse slates and requiring diverse members of recruitment teams or the promotions committees, ensuring that we source candidates from non-traditional backgrounds, something that we've also done is start to highlight some of the family-friendly policies and lifestyle policies that we offer as an attraction. A couple of things that I would mention is we recently engaged a corporation that will allow mothers to ship their breast milk when they're on travel. We've also done some great things as it pertains to new parents or adoptive parents, any parents, parental buddy system so that they can connect with a new parent and know some ins and outs and tricks of the trade of being a parent. Or parental transition. A lot of times when you're leaving to go out to work to have your child, you're concerned about your caseload, you're concerned about your clients. And so we ensure that there's some connectivity and some instruction given to both the person who's departing as well as the manager to ensure that that's a smooth transition and so that expectations are known as it pertains to what the workload's going to be, what their hours of commitment might want, the individual who's leaving may want while they're out on parental leave, or how they want to return and the workload they might have when they want to return. So those are just a few things, but we like to highlight that in addition to the traditional things that you typically do.
Yeah. And yeah, and at J&J, you know, very similar. I think you have some great companies up here that are doing some very innovative things. But, you know, I want to go back to the question you asked. You asked about what is one of the biggest challenges around acquiring diverse talent or gender within our workforce. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is that we always think about diversity and inclusion around talent. And we need to think about it differently. We need to elevate the conversation so that it becomes about driving business success, as we've been talking about here. And as long as we continue to think about it's an initiative just around talent, and we're not linking it to how this really drives innovation within our organization and how it drives both top line and bottom line results, we're going to continue to battle this, I think, right? And so, you know, again, at Johnson & Johnson, we are thinking about it at that elevated level, and I think we've heard some examples here of how others are doing that as well. But to get to, you know, what are we doing about it, I kind of think of it in a couple of different ways. First, we have to build that pipeline to make sure that we have people that are prepared to come into the workforce. So at Johnson & Johnson, we have a quite significant effort going on around supporting and encouraging young women and young girls to go into STEM-related fields, because we know that we need engineers and scientists in order to innovate for the future and to continue to solve some of the most challenging health challenges that we have around the world. So we have a lot of initiatives going in there, and we're working with thousands of young women around the world, supporting them through their education as they enter into science-related fields. The second thing that we're really looking at is then how do we bring talent into the organization? And one of the things that we've done here is that we're using some artificial intelligence. So we recognize that there is bias built into our systems and our processes, and it certainly is built into our job descriptions, right? I mean, sometimes we look at job descriptions and you wonder, does this person even exist on the earth? Because we're looking for so many qualifications. And we also recognize that within job descriptions, there are certain words and phrases that inherently have bias against women. And so by using this, and these are words like when we say we're looking for a superstar, or you know, or a rock star, or if we had a job description that had you know, 4 things that were mandatory to have, a woman would look at it and say, you know what, I'm really good and I'm expert at number one, I'm expert at number two, I'm pretty good about number three, don't know that much about that number four, I don't think I'm qualified for this. Whereas a man will look at it and say, I'm expert in number one, I'm expert in number two, I'm pretty good at number three, and I don't know anything about number four, I'm going for it, right? And they will apply for the position. So what this artificial intelligence allows us to do is to upload our job descriptions, and it literally highlights phrases that may have inherent bias in it, and it gives us options of how to reword it. And through doing that, we have increased the number of women that are applying for jobs, and more importantly, we've increased the number of women we're pulling through that job application process and hiring more women into the organization. And then I think the third thing that we have to look at is what you were talking about. How do we support women by surrounding them with all of the right resources to be successful? And so we're doing lots of things there around flexible work arrangements. We also are shipping the breast milk. I think that's a fabulous program that really is helpful. How do we put the right policies in place? And also, how do we create that inclusive environment where women can really thrive and advance and develop them?
Yeah, great. And adding on to that, one thing that I think is really pivotal is co-creation, so involving women in designing the solutions. So we have our first female CEO in our 125-year history, and Michelle Buck views her role as the Chief Energy Officer in the organization. And so I wanted to highlight that, like your organizations, we leveraged our Women's Business Resource Group to do some of the benchmarking and program design for our suite of flexible work practices that we call Smart Flex, that allows people to show up, do their best work, where they do their best work, when they do their best work, using the technology that makes all of that flexible. Absolutely. So I think women are here, women are in our organizations, women want to progress, and we need to involve them in the solutions.
That's fantastic. Susan, let's turn to you and to corporate boards. We know that many boards still lag behind in terms of diversity, gender equality. What are some approaches that are being used to promote the value of such diversity in the boardroom, and what is Women Corporate Directors doing?
Absolutely.
In that respect?
This is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. And I love all of the energy around what's happening in these wonderful companies. I am Susan Keating, and I am the CEO of Women Corporate Directors, which is a very unique global organization that absolutely focuses on women being successful, getting onto and being successful in corporate boards around the world. So as an example, we have 80 chapters, we have 2,400 women, and those women today either serve on public company boards or very large private company boards. So WCD, we have been around now for almost 18 years, and we have seen progress, whereas it was just going back a decade ago, for the S&P 500 companies in the US here, we had about 56% that had 2 or more women on boards. Today, 87% of those companies have 2 or more women. But having said that, and I have all kinds of stats that I could share with you and won't bore you with, we are moving at sort of glacial speed. We have things that we need to do to really sort of break through. And just as we're talking about the importance of providing education, advocacy, and a sense of community, those are 3 very key areas where we are innovative in helping our women leaders really not only sort of advance within companies, but also break through and make sure that these wonderfully successful women, when they get into the boardroom, understand the trends, the directions, the issues, particularly around so many companies that today are being disrupted. There's so much transformation, and the skills and sort of what needs to be addressed in boardrooms today is much different than it was a decade ago. So I really believe we need to think, one of the things that I'm really pleased about this panel is that we're looking at companies in a very holistic way, and I would just say that we could do everything and try really hard and institute all kinds of programs and so forth, but if we don't have some real strong leadership at the top that supports gender equality, it's going to sort of water down and we won't have the same impact that we could if we continue to make progress in the boardroom.
So you would also agree that sort of the corporate board almost sets the tone for what the culture can be like?
Absolutely, absolutely. And what's interesting today, and I will share this, I just am back from Asia where we had our Asia Pacific Institute, and we were talking a lot. Asia actually is behind other regions in the world in terms of the number of women on corporate boards. And so we had a huge gathering and talked about what we needed to do to sort of help one another and make sure our women are successful for those that are on boards. And I would just say that the skill, sort of what's happening in boardrooms today, just as I said earlier, what was talked about 10 years ago is totally different. And if everybody looks the same, if everybody thinks the same, you're going to end up doing the same old thing. And fundamentally today, we know, take a look at any industry, there is huge change taking place, and we need the most diverse, the most sort of challenging thinking to sort of figure out how to make decisions on behalf of companies to ensure that they are relevant, successful, and viable in the future. So we're seeing more emphasis on, just as you were talking about STEM and so forth, we're seeing much more emphasis on women that have backgrounds in technology, in math, in specific sort of industries. Again, this is different. In the past, when recruiters would go out to fill a position in the boardroom, they would generally look at the CEO population and recruit current sitting CEOs. Today, that is happening, and those were predominantly men and predominantly white men. So today, that is changing. In fact, if you take a look, Spencer Stewart, the search firm, just released a major board index, and so you can get all the specific details. But fundamentally, more and more non-CEOs are being recruited, and again, if women or even, if women have background in technology, the financial side, digital, what's going on in the social media and digital space and so forth, those are growing in terms of who's being placed. So we're seeing more women and more non-CEOs going into the boardroom, which is changing. So,
fantastic. Let's step away from the big picture for just a second. You're all leaders in your field. What sort of advice would you give to women in terms of how to succeed and how to, climb the corporate ladder?
I would say take action, be bold, and create the life of your dreams.
How do you follow that?
I would say always raise your hand. As you were saying, there oftentimes we will say, I'm not qualified. Raise your hand, say I can do it, and just figure it out.
Yeah, totally agree. For me, I would say three things. Be purposeful and strategic around your career. Think long-term about what it is that you want to do. Even if you don't know exactly, work towards something instead of allowing your career to happen to you. The second thing would be to realize the value of relationship capital. Surround yourself with a network of people that can support you, advocate for you, counsel you, because that will help to advance your career. And then the third thing would be to know your value and to be able to tell your story. Because if you can't tell what value you bring and why you should be the person to get into a role versus someone else, if you can't tell it, trust me, nobody else can. So you have to be able to tell your story.
So I think we're hearing a kind of common theme here. And I would say, in addition to just really believing you can do anything you set your mind to do and then doing it, I've also found throughout my career that it really was important to over-prepare and to really, really be ready and organized and, just not sort of take things on the fly while tapping into your intuition, your instincts, and knowing when to make the right moves. And I would say, for example, when I was sort of moving up the ladder within financial services, at that time, that was in late 80s and 90s, there weren't a lot of women in key management roles. And really, one of the things that I was willing to do was to take some side steps and take some lateral moves to learn more, because I was very curious. And I found over time that because of my breadth of experience, I outpaced so many of my peers and ultimately ended up CEO of the bank. So I honestly think some of those lateral moves are important as well. And then always, in addition to circle of friends, make sure you have a couple of key advocates in the company. Mine were all men, because at that time there weren't, many women in management, but you have to have those mentors or advocates.
Totally support that. Yeah, and I found the same thing in my career, that I did a lot of sort of lateral movement that helped to accelerate me. The other thing, and I'm sure you all have had this as well, was being willing to take a little bit of risk, right? Like stepping into those positions. Like when you step into a new position, you should feel that knot in your belly. You should feel uncomfortable. If you walk into a position and you feel like, I got this, I can do it from day one, that's probably not the right position, because you're not stretching and growing yourself and you're not challenging yourself. And the more you can do that, the faster you'll accelerate your career.
As we're already drawing to the close of, or towards the end of our panel, one last question that I want to leave the audience with is, there's clearly been so much change already over the past decades, over the past years even. What do you think is the biggest challenge that will come at businesses in terms of gender equality and diversity over sort of the next 5 to 10 years? Like, what's the next frontier, so to speak? Alicia?
Well, I think that tremendous strides have been made, but there's clearly more work to do. And I'm really proud to work for an organization that visibly commits to gender inclusion and diversity. Hershey's certainly doing its part to create a more innovative and inclusive world. My hope is that all of us collectively as a society create such momentum and impact that we're able to reach gender parity in corporate leadership for women, not by 2030, but by 2024.
Yes, and just to follow on that precisely, we have a momentum now, I'd say, that we've started finally a momentum. And what I would say is corporate America, just be ready, because we're on our way, and just be ready, because once we get this innovative mindset and this inclusive mindset more pervasive in corporations, where we are allowing women to blossom and grow and excel and perform and contribute, there's going to be a lot more to come. So the corporations need to be ready for it. That's my advice.
Absolutely, totally agree. And when you ask about what are some of the challenges that we anticipate, we see how businesses are being disrupted daily, right? I mean, the way we bank has changed over the last couple of years. The way we purchase anything has changed, right? I mean, I don't know what I would do if I got home and there wasn't an Amazon box sitting on my porch, right? Every day there's a box there, right? But the way we consume things are changing. So, I think we need to be prepared that industries are going to continue to get disrupted. The pace of change is going to continue to accelerate. The way we consume information, the way we purchase is going to shift. So the more that we can understand how some of those changes may impact our business and prepare ourselves individually to lead in that change environment and to be prepared for some of the things like you talked about, social media, technology, STEM, I think the more successful we can be and the more we'll see women advance in the workforce.
So just to kind of capitalize on that, I would also say that in addition to preparing women for the C-suite and board positions, which is critical, I made the comment earlier that we've been making progress, the number of women on S&P 500 boards. At the end of the day, here in the U.S., we represent 24% of the board seats. And part of the challenge, and one of the bigger challenges for us, is that there are seldom term limits with these boards, and in fact we are raising the age to retire off of these boards. So there's this block. Most of the women that are getting placed today, most of the women getting placed are because they are adding a position. It's not because folks are transitioning off. So we need to sort of demyth, the whole notion that there's not talent and we need to get aggressive. We can talk another day about WCD has lots of ideas. We're getting very innovative of how to approach this, not only in the US, but in regions around the world. And I just think the biggest challenge is if we don't have it at the top, we don't have the diversity and inclusion at the top, again, it's just going to water down our efforts. So thank you.
Indeed, we could probably talk about this for the rest of the day
Absolutely.
if we had the time, but I'm afraid we're out of time now. So I want to say thank you again to all of you, Alicia, Sandy, Wanda, and Susan. Thanks very much for having the time. Thanks for everybody.
Nicely done, ladies.
Well done. Thank you.